Welcome to Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Excel, but Were Afraid to Ask. This is Lesson 10, Data Tools and Lookups. Here's what you'll need for this lesson. Microsoft Excel 2016 or newer, or Excel 365. This lesson's example files. Speakers or headphones. If you can't hear me, you're not learning everything I'm teaching. And ideally at least 2 monitors, one for the video and one to follow along with the example files. Here's what we'll be covering in this video. Data tools, including data validation and named ranges. We'll also revisit our old friend VLOOKUP. And we'll look at some other lookup functions that Excel has. Let's get started. A named range is a cell or group of contiguous cells that you've assigned a name to. There are 2 ways to assign a name to a range. You can either select the cells and type a name in the name box, or you can use the name manager in the Formulas tab on the ribbon. Now, why would we want to name a range? Well, there are tons of advantages, but the main ones include being able to reference the name directly in formulas and functions. They make your functions more readable. It's also easier to remember when you're writing your formulas. And they appear in auto-suggest. Also, they can be used in data validation, which we'll talk about shortly. So like I said, there's actually 2 ways to name a range of cells. The first way is to just select those cells in your spreadsheet and then type a name in the name box right here next to the formulas and below the ribbon. So we're going to call this first named range here, we're going to call it states. Okay. Now I just type in states, I hit enter, and now you can see where you normally would see like the cell address of wherever I click. If you select this range, it's going to tell you that it's called states. Okay, so we're going to be able to use that now in our formulas. So here's an example of a named range being used in a VLOOKUP formula. So we write VLOOKUP. Our lookup value is right here. Now, instead of selecting the cells or typing in the cell addresses of the range that we want to use as our table array, we're just going to type in the name that we just gave it. And you can see it'll show up here in your auto suggestion drop-down box here. So we're going to choose that, and you'll see it highlights there. And then the rest of our formula is the same way that it normally would be. So we want column number 2. And we want range lookup false. And that's going to work just like it would if we had typed in the cell references. One of the advantages here is you don't have to worry about making your cell references absolute or mixed references or anything like that, because it's a static range that's referred to by that. And again, the other advantage is, this is a pretty simple formula that we're dealing with here. But as you write more complex formulas, they become pretty hard to read and to maintain. So one of the advantages of using named ranges, similar to tables, which we discussed in a recent lesson, is that I can look at this and know exactly what it's trying to do, because this range, I've given it a useful name. So the other way to add a name to a range is to go to the Formulas tab. On the Formulas tab, you'll see this defined name group. And you can click Name Manager. Now you can see that the one that we just created is here, States. And then a couple that we're going to use a little bit later in this lesson. But we're just going to add a new one now. So this one is going to be called Category. And then we have to choose the scope for the name. So the default is workbook. That means that we can use this name and reference this name in any of the tabs of the workbook. But if we wanted to make it just work within a specific tab, you can click this drop down, and you can see our options here are the names of the different tabs across the bottom of the workbook there. So we're going to leave it as workbook, and we're going to just select this column here. So this is just a list of all my expenses for 2019 that fell into the groceries or utilities categories. So we're going to figure out how much I spent on those categories in 2019. So we have this range that we've defined. That's our category range. And we're going to hit OK. Now you can see that's appeared there. If you made any mistakes, you can click this and hit Edit and make whatever changes you need to make to the name or the reference area. You can't change the scope once you've created it. So if you messed up the scope, you have to delete it, start over. So we're going to hit OK. And then we're going to add a second name, and that's going to be amount. And it's going to refer to this column. So in our sum ifs, we need a criteria column and a sum column. So that's basically what we're doing here. And there it is. And we're going to hit close once we've done that. And now we're ready to write some formulas. So we all know how to do a sum if at this point, hopefully. Equals sum if. Our criteria range is going to be category that we just added. And our criteria is this. And our sum range is amount. And you can see it highlights them the same way it would if you had typed in cell references. But now I can look at this formula and have a much better understanding of what I'm doing if I've named my range as well, which in this case I think I have. So this is my bills from last year. Data validation allows you to specify what sort of data goes in a cell or range. So it prevents unusable data from being entered, and it can prompt the user for the type of data that you're looking for. Data validation is pretty useful when it comes to, particularly when it comes to spreadsheets where you've got a lot of different users. Anyone who has shared a spreadsheet with other people knows that they may not always be as careful as you'd like them to when entering data. And so if your columns or your formulas or whatever you plan to use the spreadsheet for relies heavily on data integrity, one way that we can enforce that is with data validation. So on the data tab, appropriately enough, there is a data validation button right here. And what that allows us to do is set some data validation rules. basically you can specify what kind of data belongs in a cell or a range. So the different types that we have, the default is any value. So you can type any value into any cell right now and it's fine. But when you set a rule on that cell, so let's say we want a whole number, and we want that whole number to be just greater than 0. Any number greater than 0. Okay, so that's fine. We can type in a number and nothing will happen because that is exactly what we wanted to do. But if we try to type in a negative number, we're going to get an error message. This value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell. That's the default error message. We're going to look at how to change the error message in a second. And it gives you a couple options here. If you hit cancel, it's going to just clear out the cell entirely and let you try and start again. And if you type text in there, you'll see you're going to run into the same problem. If you hit retry instead of cancel, it's going to take you back into the cell with your previous input. And now you should be able to fix it, basically. Like, oh, I made a slight typo. I just want to delete that last bit of it. I don't want to start over. So that's the basic way that data validation works. And I think you could see, as we were going through that there were a couple other options here. So we're going to walk through some of those. But the gist of it is that you have a drop down here, and you choose what type of input you want to allow in the cell. Okay, so let's look at another example. In this case, we were going to try a decimal. And again, it's going to offer you some options for what those numbers are, right? It can be between or not between a set. It can be equal to or not equal to. For example, I can set as long as the decimal is not equal to 0.5, then we're good, So I can type in 7, that's a decimal. I can type in, that's fine. But if I type in 0.5, it's going to give me an error message. That error message isn't very helpful, especially if you have other people that are going to be using your spreadsheet. You want to make sure they have a chance to do this right. So what we can do is, in that data validation screen, there's a couple ways we can help your users. One of them is by giving them an input message. So the input message shows up when your user selects the or clicks in one of the cells to which the data validation is applied. So here we're going to do some dates. So the instructions, basically, that we're giving to the user here should be enter a valid date. And the input message can be something like, please enter a date between okay, and then we're going to set the data validation rules to be between and always make sure that you're giving correct instructions here. There's nothing more frustrating than the help, the tooltips or whatever, telling you that you want one kind of data and then rejecting the data that's entered because it's not what you were looking for. So you can see this adds a little tooltip. When I click here, it's going to tell me, please enter a date between those two dates. Normally, this might be a little more, you might make this a little more useful if this is someone's hire date, the date that they started working for you, you might write in the thing, please enter the applicant's hire date or whatever. Something that helps the user understand what the point of the data in this cell is supposed to be. So again, if I enter, a valid date, it's going to work. If I try to enter it's going to tell me that it's not a valid entry. And that's sort of that's where I want to talk about the third tab here, which is the error alert. Now, when you enter invalid data, an error message pops up. You have the ability to set what that error message looks like, but also what that error message does. So there are three styles of error message. There's stop. That's the one we've seen a couple times here. There's warning, which we'll look at in a moment, and there's information. So a stop message forces you to fix your bad input. So here you might write invalid date. Please enter a valid date between 1/1 and 12/31. So now, when I enter an invalid date, I'm going to get this custom error message. So now my users are going to know, they're going to know what they did wrong. And I can retry or I can cancel. The next kind of error alert is a warning. I'm going to leave the same message in there for now. So when I enter an invalid date, I'm going to get this warning message. It's an invalid date. Please enter a valid date. Do you want to continue anyways? So a warning, if you hit cancel, it's going to clear out again. If you hit no, again, it's going to bring me right into the cell to fix the problem. And if I hit yes, it's just going to let it slide. We prefer that you enter a valid date. If you don't, hey, we're just going to let you keep doing your thing. Okay, so that's what a warning error alert does. And then an information alert is, even a little less strict than that. It's going to say, please enter a valid date, and you just hit OK, and it will tell you. So there you might have a different type of error message. Your message might be, hey, this looks wrong. Please correct it if it is. And then tell the user, kind of trust the user to do that. I almost never use information alerts. I sometimes use warning alerts, and I frequently use stop alerts because I don't trust people to use the right data. So again, we're going to look at time, and time works exactly like date does. You can set a range of times. So this could be, for example, if your work hours are from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., you might set that as your time. And then if someone tries to put 7 p.m., they're going to get, an issue. But if they put a valid time, then it will appear there. And text length allows you to set a maximum length for the input. So here you can say, I'm looking for data. It's got to have at least 2 characters, and I don't want it to have more than 100 characters. And you can see that this will work, and that won't work. So that's how text length works. And now we get to the exciting one, and that is list. So one of the cool things that data validation allows you to do is add a list of values for your data validation. So in this case, you can just type a list of values separated by commas if you want to, and those will be the only options that you can have in the cell. Now, a common choice, for example, would be yes and no. And this is going to give me a drop-down to choose yes or no. You can also type yes or no. But if you try to type anything else, you're going to get your same error alert. So having a drop-down box is very helpful because it allows your users to pick from a list exactly what you want for that column. This is very commonly used for anything with a status or where you want users to give a very specific type of input. In addition to typing a list, you can also reference a list that's in a range somewhere in your spreadsheet. Now, one way that we can do this is by going to data validation, clicking here, and then selecting a range of cells. Now, my drop-down menu has whatever is in that range of cells. You can also, instead of selecting a range of cells, you can also reference a named range. That named range has to be a single column named range. So, for example, you wouldn't want to do this because it wasn't really set up that way. But you could use equals category and select from that range. Or we could create a named range for just the list of state names and use that. But that's how list works. And then finally, we have custom data validation. As with most things in Excel, you can just write a formula to decide whether the input is valid. So this is good for a number of things. You can do custom text validation, for example, on an email address field, you can make sure there's an @ symbol. Or for something where there's a non-continuous number range. For example, my input should be either greater than 10 or less than 3. You can write a formula, any formula here, and if it evaluates to true, then the input will pass validation, And if it evaluates to false, then the input will not pass validation. So what we do here is equals this cell is greater than 10. Or it's less than 3. And if I put a number that's greater than 10, it's going to work. If I put a number that's less than 3, it's going to work. But if I put a number that isn't one of those, I'm going to get my error message. And so that's basically how data validation works. Now it's time to revisit our old friend VLOOKUP. Now you may recall that in a previous lesson, I said that for now we would only deal with examples where range lookup input equals false. Today, we're going to look at when we can use range lookup equals true. When the lookup key is part of a set of continuous numerical data and the lookup column is sorted in ascending order, and you want to return the row that's closest without going over your lookup value, or the Price is Right rule, as I like to call it. If all three of these things are true, then you could use range lookup equals true. So how do we do it? First, make sure your table array, which is the range where you're looking for the lookup value, is sorted in ascending order by the first column. Write your VLOOKUP formula as you normally would, but with true for the last input. One of the limitations to the way we've been doing our VLOOKUPs is that your lookup value has to have an exact match in the range where we're looking it up. That's fine when you're looking up names or email addresses, the things that we practiced in a previous lesson, and a lot of the things that you're going to be dealing with. But when you're dealing with dates or another continuous set of numbers, that's not always going to be the case. So here we have an example. This is the prime interest rate by date. And ever since starting in 1995 and all the way up until March of this year. And, a couple things about this data, this is every date that the prime interest rate has changed in the last 25 years. But if we want to know the prime interest rate on a specific date, this doesn't enumerate every single day. Now, if it were a smaller data set, maybe it's easy enough to just put every single date between February 1st, 1995 and July 7th, 1995 and fill them all in with 9%. I think that's probably not practical in most cases. So what would happen if I ran just a regular VLOOKUP the way that we've learned it previously against this data? It would look like this. I've already given that a named range. So normally we had been using false. Now, in this case, that's going to return an NA error because the date 3/1/1995 does not appear anywhere in this range. The date 2/3/2000 does appear, and so that one works. But we want something that's going to give us what the prime rate was on any day. We want to be able to enter any date. And so the solution there is to use range lookup equals true. So the syntax is the same. we have our lookup value, we have our table array, we have our column index number, and we have true. Now, the formula is going to return the value that is the next, it's going to return the closest value without going over. So 3/1/1995 is going to return 2/1/1995, the interest rate, because that was the most recent one, the next smallest one. This way you can pull anything for any date. So that's a pretty simple example. One other thing about this is that your data in this column, in the column where it's being looked up, has to be sorted ascending. If it's not sorted ascending, you're going to get complete nonsense as your output. So, for example, if I just sort this by the rate instead, you get totally different and not correct answers. So it's very, very important that you always have your reference range where you're going to be looking up the number sorted ascending. Smallest on the top, largest on the bottom, when you're using range lookup equals true. When you're using range lookup equals false, because it's an exact value, it doesn't matter how this is sorted. So that's very important. Let's take another example. So these are the current year federal tax brackets. And the way tax brackets work is you pay a certain rate on a marginal portion of your income, right? So if I made this amount per year, what would my highest marginal tax rate be? So we can look that up again with VLOOKUP. We've got our lookup value is the annual income. Our table array is going to be this here. Our column index number, because we want the marginal tax rate, that's going to be column 3. And we're using, again, VLOOKUP, range lookup equals true. So this is going to return what the highest marginal bracket that each of these would be subject to is. And of course, we missed an important step here. There we go. So this is everyone's marginal tax rate. So how do you get to this? How do you get from this to what you actually owe in taxes? I've given us a little helper column here. So basically, this is the maximum amount that you could owe from each bracket. So your estimated tax burden would be whatever you owe from lower income brackets, right? So if you're in this income bracket, you owe this plus 32% on whatever amount you have in between these two numbers. So first, let's get this info. What do you owe from lower brackets? That's going to be sum if this range is less than your marginal tax rate, then sum these numbers. Okay, so this will be what you owe just from lower brackets. Doesn't include what you owe in your current bracket. So now that we have that, we need to add what you owe in your current bracket. So to do that, we have to figure out basically how much more income you have than the max of the next lowest bracket. So we're going to do your annual income minus another VLOOKUP here. It's going to be annual income, and we're going to look it up in this column. And we're going to use true again. So this is going to give you the amount of your income that falls into that top bracket. And then we're going to just multiply that by your marginal tax rate. And this would be your estimated tax burden. And then if you wanted to, you could calculate your effective tax rate, which is just your estimated tax burden divided by your annual income, since that's another thing we see commonly. So that's a couple of uses of how to do VLOOKUP with a ranged lookup equals true. Now, by now, you've probably noticed how useful VLOOKUP is, but you've probably also noticed how rigid it is. Sometimes VLOOKUP just can't do what you need. It can't look up horizontally instead of vertically. It can't deal with the lookup key being to the right of the data you want to return. But luckily, Excel has several other options for performing lookups. We're going to look at 3 of them: HLOOKUP, match and index, and the brand new XLOOKUP function. So first up, HLOOKUP. HLOOKUP is basically VLOOKUP lying on its side. We use HLOOKUP to cross-reference data where the lookup key is in the top row and the value you want returned is below it. The syntax is equals HLOOKUP, lookup value, table array, row index number, range lookup. All these arguments work exactly the same way as they do in VLOOKUP, but with a vertical table array. So the first thing I want to say about HLOOKUP is I want to confess something, and that is I have a habit of screwing up HLOOKUP every time. For some reason, my mind only works in VLOOKUP, and when you take it and turn it on its side, I don't know, something about my brain doesn't like it. So I don't know how many tries this is going to take me, but we'll demo it real quick. Why not? So HLOOKUP is just VLOOKUP taking a nap, basically. Instead of your range going this way with your lookup value in the first column and specifying a column number, your range goes this way. Your lookup value is in the first row of your range, and your column array goes, or your row array goes this way. So let's give it a try. HLOOKUP. This is our lookup value. Our lookup array is 1 and 2 here. Make sure we're using fixed reference there. And then our row index number is 2. And again, if we weren't looking up dates, we would use false. And but most of these won't work with that. So we're actually going to use true. Again, under the same conditions that we used before, which is that these have to be in order in our lookup range, or else it won't work. And again, it's going to return the lookup, the next smallest lookup. So that's HLOOKUP. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. One, because I don't like it. It's weird doing lookups sideways instead of down. And two, because it's exactly the same as VLOOKUP, and you guys have already mastered VLOOKUP. So there it is, HLOOKUP. We use the match and index functions when the lookup column is to the right of the column that we want to return. Match returns the relative position of an item in an array. The syntax is equals match, lookup value, lookup array, match type. And the match type is equals 1 for less than, 0 for exact, or -1 for greater than. Now, match is going to return a row number. That's not exactly what you want when you're trying to do a VLOOKUP, but that's where the index function comes in. We use the index function to return the value of a cell given the cell's position in an array. The syntax is equals index, array, row number, and then an optional column number. When we put index and match together, we can do lookups even when the lookup column is to the right of the data we need. So for example, we would combine it by putting the match function where the index function expects a row number. I know this sounds insanely complex, but let's give it a try. So like I said, one of the difficulties people sometimes have with VLOOKUP is that you can't go to the left. You can only go to the right. And this has been solved by a lot of people by using the match and index functions together. So the way the match function works is we have a lookup value and a lookup array. And a match type. In this case, we want, again, an exact match. If we were doing something similar to those range lookups with dates or dollar amounts or something, then we might do a less than, which was one. But we're sticking with exact match. Okay, so what does this give us? This tells us where in the array that we just specified where this value appears. So this employee ID is in the second row, and this one's in the fourth row, and this one is in the 20th row of the array. That in and of itself doesn't help us very much. So to use index, we're going to choose our array. Now, it's not the same array as our match function. Our match function is our array where we're doing the lookup, and our index array is going to be this one, where we want to return a value from. And then we have our row number. Just going to plug it in like that for now. And we don't need a column number because it's a one-column array. Okay, so that's going to return essentially what a VLOOKUP would, but in reverse. So just to put it all together, we have index. This is our array for index. And then to get our row number, we use a match function, which is looking up this value in this array, and with an exact match. Okay, and so that should give us the same answer that we got over here, but all in one function. So that's how we use index and match when VLOOKUP won't allow us to go in the opposite direction. Sometimes if you're in control of the data, if it's your spreadsheet, you can rearrange your columns and not have to do this if you're much more comfortable with VLOOKUP. Understandable. VLOOKUP is probably one of the more common things that you'll learn in this course that you'll use. But sometimes you're not in control of the data and you have to do it this way. So now you have this tool in your arsenal as well. And now a quick word about XLOOKUP. Now, in the 10 years that I've been teaching Excel, I've covered most of the topics in this course many, many times, but not this one. This is the first time that I've ever covered XLOOKUP, and there's a reason for that. To solve all of the issues and rigidness that we talked about with VLOOKUP, Microsoft just recently, I'm talking at the end of 2019, added a new function called XLOOKUP. XLOOKUP allows you to specify your lookup array and return array separately, meaning it can do the work of VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, index match, and even if error all in one. But there is a catch. Right now, it's only available on Excel Online. So the syntax is XLOOKUP, the lookup value, the lookup array, the return array, a default value in case your lookup is not found, match mode, and search mode. Let's give it a try. So throughout this course, I've fairly steadfastly avoided using the online version of Excel wherever possible. And there's a reason for that. The online version of Excel does not have all of the shortcuts. It does not have all of the tools or functionality of the desktop version of Excel. But one thing it does have is this new XLOOKUP function. Now, Microsoft says this is going to be available to Office 365 subscribers at the end of this year in the desktop version of Excel. But for now, it's available in the web version of Excel only. So if you don't have access to the web version of Excel, or you just don't want to learn XLOOKUP or anything, you can skip to the end of the lesson and the recap. But in case you are interested in seeing this in action, I thought I'd do a quick demo of it because it is intended to solve sort of a lot of the things that we said are limitations of VLOOKUP. Now, heads up, I have never used XLOOKUP in real life. I've used it, I've demoed it once or twice, but I've never really used it because I don't use the web version of Excel. But I'm going to show it to you guys, and we're going to kind of learn it together. So here we go. We're going to just go through our previous examples, but we're going to use XLOOKUP for all of them. Okay, so we're going to give this a try. So we have XLOOKUP, and our lookup value, that's still this. And our lookup array is going to be just the column where we're going to find the lookup value. So that's this column here. And our return array is going to be just the column we want to return. So one of the advantages here is you don't have to do that column index number thing. When you have a large data set, having to count like, okay, this is column number 20 or something, you don't have to do that anymore with XLOOKUP. So that's our return array. The other thing you don't have to do anymore is wrap VLOOKUP in an if error in case your value isn't found. So that's included right in XLOOKUP, an if not found. So we're just going to put not found. That'll come instead of an NA error if we don't have anything. Our match mode is we want -1. That's our match mode because that's going to bring the next smallest item. And our search mode is sorted in ascending order. So that's going to be this. Hey, it works. And we're going to pull this down here. And you can see, like, if we had put, this would normally return an NA error unless we wrapped the whole thing in an if error. But now it's going to return that not found because we've specified that right in there. So that's pretty cool. We can do the same thing again with HLOOKUP. So instead of our HLOOKUP, we're going to use an XLOOKUP here. And this is our lookup value. And our lookup array is going to be horizontal instead of vertical. And our return array is going to be horizontal instead of vertical. And we're still in match mode. So the -1 is the equivalent of the true that we were using. 0 is the equivalent of false. -1 is the equivalent of true from V and HLOOKUP. That's our match mode. Our search mode is going to be 2 again because it's sorted ascending. And that's going to return our data. So again, we've done both of those, the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. We've replaced them both with XLOOKUP. And then finally, we're going to replace our match and index with an. This is our lookup value. Our lookup array is column B. Our return array is column A. This time we're on exact matches only. We don't want next smallest. And then our search mode is just 1. We're going from the top. It doesn't matter. So that should get us the same answers that we got before. And that's everything you need to know about XLOOKUP, or at least it's everything I know about XLOOKUP. I'm looking forward to this coming into Excel proper so that I can make some better use of it. But for now, it's only available online. And Microsoft says that in July, actually, is when we should be getting it. But we'll see what happens there. Here's what we learned today. We looked at data tools, including data validation and named ranges. We also learned how to use VLOOKUP with a range lookup equals true argument. And we checked out the HLOOKUP function, the match and index functions, and the brand new XLOOKUP function. That's it for this lesson. Join us again next time.